Welcome to Part 8 of the Feedback Masterclass by Mote. In Part 8 of this experience, we're going to focus on 6 steps that you or your department or your school can take to build an effective feedback program. So let's get into this process so you can get started integrating all of the ideas that we've explored in the previous 7 parts of the series. So the first phase is to understand. Work with a team or work with a colleague to begin with understanding a clear definition of feedback that will be used by all parties involved. We've explored a number of ideas in the previous 7 parts of this series to clearly define and understand what feedback is. The one that I think that is most valuable and most helpful is the idea of diminishing that gap or closing the gap from where students are to where we need them to be. But also there's a number of other ideas and concepts embedded in high quality and effective feedback. I would recommend reviewing the earlier parts of the video series and even downloading the slide deck provided so you can clearly define and make a highly functioning working definition for your team, yourself, or your department as you're embarking on this journey. Once you've developed a really clear definition that everyone is comfortable and you feel like you have a solid understanding of, the next thing is to do is develop a clear understanding of the 4 types of feedback. So we explore the ideas around self-feedback that's really focused on the individual learner that has the most minimal impact of the 4 types. We explored task-specific feedback that can be corrective in nature and is really specific about that individual task that the learner is focused on. And then the 2 that have by far the most significant impact is process feedback and self-regulation. So process feedback focuses on the things the student can do in their process to successfully complete that task. And then, like we talked about earlier, diminishing that gap between where they are and where we need them to be. Now, self-regulation might be the most impactful, but it's also the most challenging. It focuses on what the student can do as an independent learner to guide their own experience in this instance and moving forward. So even removing any feedback specific to the task and really focusing on the learner themselves, but not the characteristics and the qualities of the learner, but what that learner can do to become a self-regulated learner. So engage in discussion either independently with reflection or with a colleague, with a PLC, with a small team or a department on really evaluating the 4 types of feedback. You could have an interesting experiment where you might gather work that you've provided to students, evaluate the feedback, and then quantify whether your feedback is at the self, task, process, or self-regulation level, and then even practice creating feedback in those different types of levels. Feel free to go back and check out the phase of this 8-part video series that really explores the 4 types of feedback. That could be a helpful review as you're engaged in this journey. The next phase is to review the work that you're providing. So while it's critical to have a clear definition of what quality feedback looks like and understand the different types of feedback, we also have to have an audit of the learning tasks or activities that we're providing to make sure there's a clearly defined learning target and purpose of the work that students can understand before they begin. So it's challenging for students to be actionable with the feedback we've provided if there's really no clearly defined purpose of the task. It's even challenging for the educator to provide high-quality feedback if the clearly defined learning target isn't quite there, or if it's kind of murky, or there might be a number of learning targets. So this could be a really some low-hanging fruit on how you might be able to create high-quality feedback is really review the work you're providing, clearly defined for you, clearly defined for the learner. What is the purpose of the experience? What do we want them to get out of it? Where do we want them to end up when they're done with it? And then all the feedback you can provide can be really focused on getting to that end goal or getting to that point. Let's move to phase 4. Practice creating and delivering feedback around each of these 4 types. So now that you have a clear definition, you've developed an understanding of the 4 types of feedback, maybe even audited the feedback you've provided. You've reviewed your assignments and your tasks to make sure that there's a clearly defined goal. Now you can go ahead and practice. Pull examples of student work that you might have, or in the next round of an assignment, really focus on, am I delivering self-level feedback, task, process, or self-regulation. Now, keep in mind, it doesn't mean that you have to focus on providing only one type of these 4 types, but it's important to recognize that we might not want to always land on self and task, and eventually include or embed process and self-regulation. In the next phase of this process, it's peer evaluation. This is where having a colleague or a team or a PLC can be really valuable to review the feedback that you may have created for students to help guide each other towards high quality, impactful feedback. It can be really challenging when we're looking at our own work or trying to evaluate our own process. We can end up with rose-colored glasses on, and it's hard to really distinguish between the different types of feedback, and even getting some insight or overview or guidance from a colleague who's embarking on this same journey can be really valuable. What is often helpful is to keep these feedback types and the purpose of feedback and the goal of feedback in mind, even when you're providing guidance for a colleague or receiving guidance from a colleague, to make sure that the feedback we're providing isn't focused on the teacher or the self. It might not even be focused on that specific task, the process of creating feedback, but it could be focused on what they can do, their self-regulation, or what they can do in terms of their process to improve their feedback for the next round of student work. In the last phase of this whole process, it's integrating Mote. So once we have a clear definition, we understand the types of feedback, we've reviewed our tasks and assignments to align them to a clearly defined target, we've even practiced creating these types of feedback, then at that point, it's helpful to begin experimenting with Mote and getting really comfortable with Mote in a Google environment. So I recommend that you review the phase of this Feedback Masterclass where we dig into and demonstrate Mote in all the different capacity and ways that you can use it in Google Classroom or in Google Documents or in Google Slides. So get really comfortable with that tool. The difference between adding a comment on a Google document with Mote or by using the Mote Pad or the Mote Book or what it might look like in Google Classroom when you're adding a private audio comment for students. But start small, pick one assignment or pick a small cohort of students to shift over to audio feedback. Now, another important thing to keep in mind is when we're integrating Mote into the process, it doesn't mean that it has to be audio feedback all of the time. There's academic research around the idea that certain types of feedback may be best suited for text. When you're providing corrective feedback on spelling or punctuation or the structure of a sentence, that all may be best suited for text because it's corrective in nature and the student can compare the corrective feedback you've provided in a text format to their individual work. However, when we're shifting to higher quality, more impactful feedback around self-regulation or process, this is when audio feedback can be so valuable because they can hear tone, they can hear intention, and that's when the audio feedback with Mote really becomes conversational between the teacher and the student, and it can even supplement for the challenge around maybe not being able to meet face-to-face to provide that type of feedback. So I hope this last phase of the Feedback Masterclass by Mote was helpful, and it's giving you a starting off point to begin to engage in this process of evaluating and understanding what high quality feedback looks like and beginning to shift your practice with Mote as the foundation of audio feedback in your classroom. So thanks for watching this entire experience. Feel free to share this resource, the slide deck, the page, and the videos with colleagues, and we hope to see you in a future Mote experience.